All right, so what's the purpose of the end of year 3 data collection? The Every Student Succeeds Act requires us to identify several different data types, including persistently dangerous schools. The Individual with Disability Act requires us to report suspension expulsion counts related to students with disabilities. And then there's state legislation, AB 2657, for instance, that requires us to provide incidents information for restraints and seclusions for any students. And then, of course, a lot of end of year data, not just end of year 3, provides information for the California School Dashboard. And then there are some public reports on DataQuest that are not census day related. And so you have to, pay attention to those reports on DataQuest because some of them are academic year counts and some of those will be fall 1 census day counts. And so specifically information that comes from end of year 3 is chronic absenteeism, your suspension rate, your graduation rate. Part of that is end of year 3, your cumulative enrollment. We have our 1 year graduation count. And then your English learner progress, right? Part of that would be the RFEP students. And we're kind of rolling visibility into your long-term EL information. It's a two-phase approach. So this year and then next year, we'll provide the LTEL subgroup on more reports so you can account for those students as well. So we have a terminology slide. I considered hiding it. We've had it for several years. I guess it's beneficial if you're new. And so our behavioral incidents, we call it behavioral incidents because it's not discipline any longer, right? An incident of restraint or seclusion does not have to coincide or be the result of a disciplinary event. It could be for your own student safety. So we've gone away, even though discipline is part of behavioral incidents, it's not solely discipline. Incident is defined as an event resulting in the use of physical or mechanical restraint or results in discipline, pretty much. A student may have committed an offense. Incident result, in terms of CALPADS, is the disciplinary action or evidence of restraint or seclusion, right? So specifically, mechanical and physical restraints are types of results. Seclusion is a type of result, but then also suspension, expulsion, other means of correction, in-school suspension, all those would be results. And then your statutory offense is, if it's not an incident of restraint or seclusion, it's the explanation of why the student is receiving a incident. And so all statutory offenses are mapped to violations that are outlined in Education Code 48900 and 48915. If you're unfamiliar with these two education code, 48900 says you can suspend a student if they've committed any of these offenses, right? So these are the suspendable offenses. 48915 says if your student has committed any of these offenses, you can recommend expulsion. And so these are the only offenses you need to submit. So if your student hasn't committed a statutory offense, you should not have a disciplinary record for them unless it's a behavioral incident that resulted in restraint or seclusion. So that's why we have these definitions. And then in terms of seclusion and restraints, these are brief definitions. You really, if you're reporting incident of restraint or seclusion, your principals, your vice principals, your discipline authority should really understand, how to properly administer these, but also report these as well. And so seclusion is the involuntary confinement of a pupil alone in a room in which area the student is physically prevented from leaving. And then in terms of restraints, a mechanical restraint is the use of a device to restrict a student's freedom of movement. And a physical restraint is a personal restriction that immobilizes a student. Those are the definitions. All right, so we have a calendar here. And so we just want to let you know that the reporting period is from July 1 to June 30th. That's the same for end of year. That's the entire academic year. So all 4 data collections have the same time period. The incidents you're reporting for any student that's primary, secondary, or short-term enrolled in grade level TK through 12. So what's missing here? All right, don't everyone type in the chat box at once. Enrollment status 50. So if you have infants or toddlers, Lord forbid, they're getting suspended and expelled. But we do know private school students may have that, but we're not collecting data on private school students. So we just want to point that out. then who should report the incident, right? All school sites are expected to report discipline data, even NPS schools. However, the expectation is that you gather the data from them and report it on their behalf to CALPADS. NPS schools actually do not have access to CALPADS or CALPADS accounts. We hope that you would know that. And then when reporting incidents, again, report all violations 48,900 and 48,915. Report all instances of restraint and seclusion, even if it does not is not the result of a violation, though 48,900 or 4915. Report any increment of day a suspension may occur. So it doesn't have to be a full day. If a student is sent home for half a day, report the suspension. Report the duration of any suspension or expulsion. So if a student has a suspension code 100 or 110, you have to report the duration, right? If it's a half a day, a full day, 3 full days, 5 days, and then the expulsion. Report the length of the expulsion. Other incident results do not require the duration, right? So other means of correction is an option. We don't expect you to tell us how long other means of correction lasted. So maybe a student got detention for a week. We don't need to know that. And I would assume the reason why results in that a student is missing curriculum if they're suspended or expelled, but other means of correction usually don't take students out of the classroom. So therefore, we don't have to account for how many days they missed instruction because they didn't miss instruction. That's just my thought. I didn't read that anywhere. And then you have restraint and seclusion, which is also required for any student, not just your students with disabilities, right? And we'll be talking about reporting restraint and seclusion for students with disabilities shortly. And so we could only expect that it will become an indicator for data accuracy in years to come. Based on the size of your districts, I could imagine the general population following the students with disability model, but it is expected that any instance of restraint and seclusion is reported. And I believe the ed code for that is 4900.5. Oh, here it is. 4900.51. Ooh, or 4905.1. I was close. I didn't see it here. I was trying to reference it, so you can look it up, and it's right in front of my face. All right, and then monitoring restraint and seclusion data, right? And so this is for students with disability. And that's why I wanted to emphasize on the previous slide, restraint and seclusion is for any student, not just students with disability. However, students with disability we're paying particular attention to, right? And that's because the reporting of restraint and seclusion is inaccurate, right? They're finding gross inaccuracies in the reporting of them. And so LEAs reporting more than 2 restraints or seclusion, a 2-to-1 ratio, will be asked to perform student record reviews, right? So if you have a 2-to-1 ratio of restraints to seclusion per student, they're going to ask you to check your records. LEAs that report 0 instances of restraint or seclusion and have more than 100 students with disabilities, or report 0 instances of restraint or seclusion and have more than 100 students with disabilities at NPS schools, or, and this could apply to all of us, fail to certify interview 3, will be flagged for questionable data and have to complete monitoring activities, including record reviews, right? And so they're paying close attention to the reporting of restraints and seclusion for students with disabilities. And that's what I was alluding to. Um, I could see this being expanded to general education in the future years, just because based on your student population, is it likely or dislikely for you to have, or unlikely? I don't know what I just said. Unlikely for you to have instances of restraint and seclusion. You might have a 0 policy, right? You don't ever restrain or seclude a student, but you know, we want to make sure this is being reported. And I could see why, right? If you're physically restraining the student, we want to make sure that it's not done disproportionately. It's not done, over officiously, right? We don't want these kids tossed around. So I can see the sensitive nature of this data. And then we point out the Defiance Law. It was expanded to go to 2029 and pretty much says students from TK through 12 cannot be suspended solely for willful defiance. A lot of times, and that's CALPADS offense code 511, a lot of times it will be reported, right, without an additional offense. So there might be an offense, the student commits to where the teacher says, go outside or go to the office or you need to do whatever. And then the student says, no, I ain't doing it. You can't make me, right? So you say willful defiance, right? I've gave the student instruction. They willfully defied me. You have to report both offenses if that student is going to get suspended. And so a lot of times it's just making sure that your administration knows what to report, how to report it. And then if you have poor practices and you're, breaking the law essentially, suspending students for being willfully defiant, um, you want to change those practices. And so that's, the point of this slide. Make sure everyone understands that. And then teacher suspensions, we point out because as it refers to willful defiance, a teacher can suspend a student, and a teacher suspension is a classroom suspension, right? It's a little bit different than a traditional suspension where the student is suspended from the campus. And so the teacher suspension is defined in Ed Code 48910, and the teacher can suspend a student for willful defiance. And so in CalPADS, we don't have a code for teacher suspension. You're going to report that just as a suspension. You're going to get a warning because you have suspended a student for willful defiance. You have to know locally, you have to code, write a note, or do something so that you understand locally that CalPADS is throwing you a warning, but this is accurate. This is what happened, and you have to be able to, say, oh yeah, it was a teacher suspension. All of you're going to see in CalPADS is suspension code 100, offense code 511. CalPADS is going to ring the alarm. You're breaking the law, and you have to know your data. And doing so, you will understand that teacher suspensions you can still suspend a student for willful defiance, and among other reasons, but that's not going to be portrayed in CalPADS. And CalPADS is trying to be as helpful as possible by throwing that warning. And it's a warning because we understand there are circumstances in which a student may be suspended. It may be solely for 511, and it may not be breaking the law. It could fall under section 48910. All right, and then NPS reporting expectations. So if you are a student information system or a CalPADS data coordinator, you're going to have to collect the incidents that occur at your NPS schools and put them in your student information system and submit them with the rest of your students. Um, a lot of times we don't have a direct line of communication with our NPS schools, but your special education staff will. And so make sure you work with them. And this is also where you want to consider what roles and access you give your special education staff, right? If they're responsible for their students' discipline, they may need the discipline roles, even though a lot of times we think they only need the special education data roles. If they're liaising and corresponding with the NPS schools, they may need greater visibility and discipline access. So it's just something to consider. But ultimately, any missing data, any data errors, you're going to have to resolve. So the buck really falls on you. And so we just want you guys to be aware that you have to liaise and collect that information and make sure that when you submit it, it's complete. So there's a lot of importance on gathering this information from your NPS schools and making sure they know what to report. And if they don't, you could try to help them best you can. or in addition, you could send them to a training. So this little one down here, end of year data population training, I don't remember. I know Brandy and Shiloh from the special education department. I might have helped with this, or Slyman might have helped with it, but you have access directly to the special education department. And so you can see it was done a couple years ago, but it hasn't changed. But it was specific for those NPS schools so they can know what data is required to report. You can send them the link if they have questions. It might help them. And so when we submit our student incidents, we first need ownership. That's through the enrollment record, right? And so when you're submitting an incident for a student, we don't ask you where it happened. We ask you pretty much where the result came from. So if Kyra and I are mortal enemies, he took my girlfriend in ninth grade and now it's 4 years. I still don't like Kyron. If I go to his high school where I don't attend and fight him in the front and we both get suspended, I'm not getting suspended where it happened. I'm not getting suspended from his high school. I'm going to get suspended from my school, right? And so you need enrollment. The student is getting discipline ultimately from their school of attendance, right? So that's something to keep in mind. Also, with summer school, which the only data we collect for the summer are incidents, right? If when I was in high school a million years ago, it was a rotational basis. And so I went to other high schools, right? A couple times for summer school. It wasn't my home school. And if I were to get in a fight there, you'd have to submit a enrollment in CALPADS to represent that. And so it's recommended. And the resource for this guidance is the CALPADS data guide. If you do have a summer school disciplinary action and it's not at the student's school of attendance, submit a 1 day just on the incident date secondary enrollment. The secondary enrollment will make it so you don't have to submit a lot of information required of primary enrolled students like the STAS. You submit a 1 day secondary enrollment on the date of the incident, and then you can submit the incident's files. Okay, so you long-winded explanation for you have to have ownership in CalPads. It's a consistent thing. Once you have ownership of the student's records, you can submit the incident, that's the sync, the result, that's the SERS, and then the SOF, which is the student incident file. I think of my belly when I think of the SOF. The sync and the SERS are strictly required. And what I mean by strictly required is that you don't have a complete incident unless you have the incident information and the result. Again, the offense may not have occurred, right? Kyron had too much caffeine, which I've seen with my own eyes. He has an incident, right? He's freaking out. He's overexcited. He's loud. And Slyman and Marshall have to restrain him. They each grab an arm and have to drag him out the hallway and make him sit at his desk. There's no offense committed, right? They're trying to keep Kyron from getting fired, so they're restraining him in terms of school. Maybe they're trying to make sure he's safe, he doesn't harm himself. They sit him in his desk, but it's an incident of restraint. It has to be reported. So you have your incident, you have your result. There's no offense. Now, if Kyron's freaking out because I've assaulted him or touched his stuff, like his backpack and his schoolwork or whatever, who knows what kids care about these days, that could be offense, right? Kyron came over and socked me out. Don't touch my homework. I don't know. But, not every incident is going to have an offense, but every incident will have a result. Even if that result is other means of correction or no correction, right? You have to have a result. All right, so when you're gathering information for a student incident, you need a date. That's key. You need the students involved and what offense they committed that makes the incident reportable, and then, of course, the results of the incident. All right. And the incident ID will be generated and it will tie all the students, the date, the offenses, and the result together. And so conceptually, here is a visual that Kyron created. It's very colorful, but it could be helpful if you're trying to conceptualize how incidents are reported. So, of course, in the center, we have incidents, and on the outside, we have these little bubbles. There are different types of incidents. So, real quickly, here in blue on the left, you can see that we have a single student incident. The student committed two offenses and has a single result, right? So, little Johnny spray painted the wall, vandalism, that's offense one, and had contraband, right? Maybe the spray paint itself was contraband. I don't know. Maybe he had some vape pen. Two offenses and was suspended, a single result. Then over here, we have another single student incident, right? We have one student, one result. No offense was committed. So this is probably an incident of restraint and seclusion, right? That's the incident where Kyron had too much caffeine and he was freaking out and they had to restrain him, right? So here's the incident. Again, here you have another single student incident with a single offense and a single result. Where here you had multiple offenses and a single result. Here you have a single offense, single result, and then you have a multiple student incident. These two kids was fighting, right? Slyman and Marshall. They had a DJ battle. It went bad. They got into a fisticuff. Marshall had a weapon as well. So he has his offense. He got two, right? He got suspended, then he got expelled. Slyman had, contraband and physically assaulted Marshall. So he has his two offenses, but one result, which was a suspension. So you have your two students. One of them has two offenses, one result. Another has one offense, two results. What we're trying to point out is the variety of what incidents may look like, but also the flexibility. And that's the reason why we have broken it down into three files, because we want every result and every offense for each student or multiple students.
All right. Well, good morning, everyone. Let me just bring up my video as well. Oh, there you go. I'm required to show my face on the recordings. So, so hi, everyone. Good morning. I'm Kyron Pagulayan. So let's move on with the rest of this session. So the next data that's being collected would be the student absenteeism. This is submitted through the STAS file. So this helps track chronic absenteeism that is being collected in the California dashboard. So what is student chronic absenteeism? It's essentially a definition where a student who misses 10% of the school year for any reason. So it could be an excused absence, it can be an unexcused absence, and it can be a hybrid. So it could also be, in a form of suspensions, medical excuses. All of those are are totaled, and if it reaches 10% or more of your total attendance days, then the student will be defined as chronic absentee, right? So before we start, there are some slides here that we hid because these are, some slides that are screenshots of the PowerPoint of the um of CalPads, and so we thought of just including it but not presenting it today. So if I am presenting a number and you guys are wondering, if I skip, that's the reason why. Okay. So anyway, the STAS reporting basics. So what's new this year? Let's start with the new information for STAS. NPS are no longer required to submit STAS. Well, duh, we know we never submitted STAS for NPS, right? So, but the explanation here is that you're no longer required to submit the actual STAS record with an exemption indicator. So, do not submit or send up STAS record for NPS students. Um, you could request or check with your SIS to make sure that this is mapped properly or configured properly. That way, you don't experience any issues when uploading files to CALPADS. Okay. So, what is the reporting period? Again, just like the incident behavior, we will be collecting all absences throughout the academic year, which is from July 1st, 2024 to June 30, 2025. STAS records are required for enrollments 10 and 30 only. So any students in the 50 enrollment are not expected. And the grade levels that are expected would be TK to 12, who attended at least one day during the academic year. Okay. And who may be reported with an exemption. So there are instances where students are exempt from STAS. When I say exempt, meaning you still have to submit the STAS record. However, you should just have the exempt indicator marked as yes. So there are instances where students are exempt. These are students who are a majority of the time in home and hospital setting. These are students who only attend college classes, so they are basically not at your site the whole time. There are students as well who come back and have an enrollment to annotate a graduation. So let's say if a student came back or finished high school during the summer, you just have to report a 1 day enrollment for that period to be able to account for that STAS record and make sure that you mark the STAS as Y. And then of course, for the exemption is also expected for students who are in adult age transition services. So if you have students who are, let's say, in their second 12th grade year or third 12th grade year, or in, up to their 18th birthday or 22nd birthday, then you should be able to just mark them as Y for the exam indicator. All right, so what attendance type is included? So this could any in the form of daily, hourly, or project-based coursework attendance for independent study students. All right, so let's just discuss some of the basics that you guys need to be aware of with regards to the STAS file. So when we say exemptions, these are records that do not have attendance and absence fields populated. So when you submit a stats record for a student who should be exempt, you just have to mark the exempt indicator as a Y and leave all of those other fields blank. Otherwise, it will throw CalPAS will validate the existing values in those unneeded fields and you will get errors. And then, of course, STAS in school and out of school suspensions are validated against the sync record. What does that mean? So if let's say you claim that a student was absent due to a suspension or due to a suspension, then of course CalPAS will have to look for a student incident record. So if let's say Nate was suspended for hitting me because he claimed I uh, took away his girlfriend, then of course he would be suspended, and that would be part of the suspension. Again, if you claim that the if Nate was suspended, was absent based on a suspension, then a sync record, a Sears record should be in should be reported to CalPADS. Okay. So for in-school suspension counts, these are automatically counted as attendance days because they are part because the student was technically in attendance on site, right? And then out of school suspension days are added to absences. So make sure that in school suspensions are CalPAS counts in school suspensions as attendance days. And then for any emergency and disasters, of course, CDE does not want this to be counted negatively against the students. So if you have, emergencies like, for example, the fires in SoCal or flooding, then of course you can request a waiver. You will need to submit a waiver to the state to be able to qualify for this reduction of attendance days. All right, so for these two fields, independent study days, non-ADA generating independent study days, and ADA generating independent study days, these are obviously for students who are in independent study. So make sure that all of the days are properly computed. It could be based on coursework, it could be based on traditional attendance, for at the school where the student is assigned to. All right, before we move on to the next data collection, do we have any questions on attendance or absence summary?
I'm working on a discipline question, Kyron. Because of my allergies, I'd rather type in the answer than read it out loud, but there's
All
none
right.
for the STAS yet.
All right, that's good. Okay, so let's move on to cumulative enrollment, the homeless reporting, and RFEP collection. Okay, so part of end of year three, before at the start, when end of year three was introduced, we only had discipline, and then absence summary was added in, and then later on, cumulative enrollment, and then the CD decided to combine all of those plus homeless and RFEP at the same time because it makes sense, right? Because everyone has to be accounted for homelessness, and also RFEP is normally reported at the end of the year or you know based on the summative testing. Okay, so let's discuss cumulative enrollment. So cumulative enrollment is a count of all students with an open enrollment that overlaps the academic year period. So, and which extends up to uh, August 15. So what does this mean? So any enrollment that overlaps July 1st, 2024 up to June 30, 2025, regardless if it's from the prior academic year or the current year, will be part of the cumulative enrollment. Now, for the adjustive cumulative enrollment, this just pertains to all enrollments that are in the current academic year. Okay. So what is the use of cumulative enrollment? So the cumulative enrollment is derived from your student enrollment record in CalPADS. Okay. So this is used as the denominator for different rates that are presented and computed in the California dashboard. So you have your suspension rate, which is technically the number of suspensions over the number of enrollment during that year, or over the cumulative enrollment. Could also be expulsion, number of total count of expulsion over the total cumulative enrollment. And then chronic absenteeism is the same. And then truancy and stability rate. Do we have any questions on the cumulative enrollment? Okay, so yeah, it will count. So if it's based on, because that's the number of days that, if it's part of the total number of days. So ADA independent study days will be part of the total attendance days. So if there are absences based on, let's say, missed coursework, if you're doing coursework, then that would be reflected in that.
Did you see the new question?
The stability rate. Oh, well. What does CALPAS expect to receive on the STAS record when a student receive a half-day suspension?
Nothing.
That
The STAS suspension days is when the student misses a full day of instruction. Generally speaking, although we don't collect ADA and CALPADS, if the student generated ADA for a day of attendance, that your systems give that student a day of attendance in the STAS. That's the guidance that was given when they created the STAS file. So it follows that. And if you think about it logically, uh, if Kyron beats me up in fourth period and I was there the first three periods, I was there, right? And so you didn't miss the instruction, which is the point of the chronic absenteeism and the STAS. And there's no validations. There's for day per day between the STAS and discipline because there are going to be a 3 day suspension might look like in all reality 2 full days and 1 half day and only be reported as 2 days in the STAS. So we don't do a day for day validation.
okay. All right. Let's move on. So we have the homeless counts. So the homeless counts are basically uh, your program 191. So these are students that are homeless in based on different categories of homelessness that you need to report in CalPAS for during the entire academic year. So if a student was homeless even just one day, it is important that you report those. That way they would be included and also would benefit from different services that students may get from the fact that they were homeless. So any student who was homeless from July 1st up to June 30 in the current academic year should be reported. So I think majority of your students are now in CalPads since you have been updating, your student profile. However, if you still have homeless students, we expect that you report them to CalPads before certifying end of year 3. So again, homelessness would basically would include the date the student was homeless, the last day the student was considered homeless, as well as the different dwelling types, and if the student is an unaccompanied youth. So for the dwelling types, the CalPAS code sets, and I think there is a hidden slide after this that that provides you the different definitions of the homeless dwelling type. Then also there is, if you would also refer to Flash 295, the CDE sent out a guidance with regards to the recent Southern California wildfires. So if you haven't read that yet, please do so. And that could probably provide you additional information on whether a student may qualify as homeless or not. Let's move on to RFEP. For the RFEP status, students who are considered RFEP, meaning when an EL student is tested this year using the summative LPAC testing, if all four criteria specified in Ed Code 313F is met and the student receive a level 4 on the summative LPAC, then the student is considered a reclassified fluent English proficient student. So upon determination of reclassification, it is important that you submit the RFEP to CALPADS. That way, they will be included in this year's reporting. Also, unlike EL and IFEP, where TOMS transmit that status to CALPADS, for RFEPs, LEAs are expected to submit the data directly to CALPADS through your SIS. Okay? And the benefit of having the student reclassified, of course, is that student will no longer be taking summative testing for the next consecutive years, because basically RFEP is a terminal terminal status for an EL student. And of course, it takes out the student from being considered at risk of being part of the long-term EL classification. So how do you this guide is just more guidance on how RFEPs are reported. So in normal times, if a student was RFEP in, during close to the end of the year or during the summative testing window and you get the scores, then of course you report the RFEP SELA status right away. However, if a student was reclassified at the last days of school and the student will no longer be coming back uh, to the district next year, then the RFEP status date should be the last day of school. That way, the student would be accounted for in your RFEP reports. Now, if a student was reclassified as RFEP during the last day of school, or was RFEP during summer or at any point where the student outside of the enrollment period, then of course, and you expect the student to be accounted for at your school, and you expect the student to come back next year, then use the first day of school next year as the RFEP status date. Okay, so these are just some guidance that you should be aware of. There is a link to the flash in the notes if you want to get additional information on that. All right, so this SIGA status reminder, if you've attended the regional meetings, this was presented there as well. It is just a reminder that students will no longer be able to use their 23-24 results for reclassification after May 31, 2025. So it is important that for students who may be reclassified based on their 23-24 scores, um, students, CD recommends that the testing them no later than May 15, 2025 to ensure that the students are included in your collection. Okay, so LEAs are recommended to update the RFEP status in CALPADS by May 15 and ensure students transferring have updated records in CALPADS within 10 days. So bottom line is, if you have these students who has 2023-24 summative testing scores, make sure that you do the necessary testing and adjustments. That way, that would ensure that your students, you know, RFEP status is accounted for in this current academic year. All right, so we have here the 1-year grad and completer collection. So this is, it's odd. Why are we? Oh, one more second. Sorry, I got. So With regards to RFEP as well, we mentioned that the RFEP, the sooner you report the student's RFEP status, the better, because it will, it will take out the student from being at risk to be an LTEL, right? Long-term EL student. So why are we emphasizing this? Because starting this year, actually even at this point, CALPADS is already collecting, at least on the ODS side, students who are potentially LTEL students. Okay, so to be able to be proactive on this, we recommend you either look at your ODS 8.1 to see if the student has a is still EL, and based on the EL days you could probably determine who are your potentially long-term EL students, or you could also download the cumulative enrollment extract. So what is the cumulative enrollment extract? Let's just bring this up here. So it's an ODS extract that includes additional data that would help you identify if a student is potentially an LTL or long-term EL. So we go to, let me just bring up tests here, and go to my extracts. I go to ODS extracts. Let me just and I download this CENR. Okay, just populate the required field. So if it's just this current year, you could do that. And then also, if you just want to get the list of students that are, for this current academic year, check the adjusted cumulative enrollment. So request a file. So you should be able to download the file. And then the user manual has a batch template that you could use to be able to bring up the file in a more legible or understandable report. So go to resource. Oh no, not resource. Yeah, go to resource, go to batch file templates, extract templates, and then download this CNR extract template. Or you can just type here CNR extract template under search. So what does this do? So let me just bring up the file I had yesterday in here, downloads. So if I just click on import and pick the file that I downloaded, it provides you this information here. So new this year are these columns. So you have here these new columns on the CNR. So ideally, or in theory, you download this file and import it into your SIS, and your SIS would be able to determine if a student is a potential LTL. So you have here the dates, you have here the EL status start date, you have here the initial US enrollment date, earliest enrollment start date, and then earliest EL start date. So, but this is basically what is identified. So look at this column, provisional LTL start date. So you will have three dates that CalPAS will consider, but then this date will basically be able to identify what date was used for the student to be considered as LTL. Okay, so look at this, the student EL on 8/17/2017, and so that's basically what, 7 years. And so that's the reason why the student is LTL. So ideally, this file, if you request it, download and import into your SIS should be able to identify any potential LTELs. And so the vendors have been notified about this. And so that way you don't have to figure the dates out yourselves. Okay. So this, and then you have the ODS extra, your cohort as well for your seniors that are in the cohort year. These reports and extracts would be the reports that you would use for LTEL. So if you have additional questions on this, then this can be more documentation would be available for that. You could go to the extracts, reports, and then go to cumulative enrollment. So there is documentation to explain the different dates or logic for this status. All right. So moving on. So we have the one-year grad and completer collection. So this is essentially your graduates for this current academic year. So the report provides a count of graduates and completers, which is used for reporting one-year grads and completers in DataQuest, and helps LEAs identify potential issues with their graduate counts before certification. So what does this say? Before certifying, make sure that your 122 and 123, the student list, are accurate. You've accounted for all of your students who should be graduates this year before certifying. And then since the cohort is picked up the week after, right? So it is important that you make sure that you certify your grads and completers with accurate data. That way you don't have to fudge or adjust or make, adjustments in your ODS file, and that there would be a discrepancy between the ODS cohort reports as well versus the one-year grad completion. Okay. All right, so we have graduate exemptions. What is graduate exemptions? This is just basically an indicator in your SENR file. When you submit or close out your SENR at the end of the year, you would then identify if a student is a graduation exemption eligible student. So what does this mean? So SB 532 essentially exempts students based on this eligibility on the table here from needing to fulfill additional local graduation requirements. So there is a state requirement for graduation, minimum requirements, as long as this eligible student subgroup meets the state requirements, then they should automatically be included as a E23100, and then mark them as a yes if there are additional requirements that they may have not met, but they are exempt for that requirement. Okay, so make sure that you know what this indicator means. That way you would be able to differentiate those students from your other students who met all requirements, including your local requirements. All right, so as I've mentioned, the cohort re-enrollment reminder. So since there is a week, since the certification deadline is different from the cohort collection deadline, there's a gap week between those two collections. It is important that you make sure that all of your end of year three enrollments, complete enrollment exits are properly reported by August 15 and certified. And then, of course, you have to make sure that any students that are coming back next year, if you have students who are in the cohort, let's say you have 12 graders who are expected to return the next year, and you've exited them as an E155, please make sure that they have a future enrollment reported in CALPADS before the cohort deadline. The reason behind this is that if a student was exited with an E155 and the student does not have a future enrollment reported before this August 15 collection, those students will be considered as a dropout. So if you have students who are coming back for transition services or coming back for a fifth year, make sure that you have a re-enrollment record in there. Otherwise, CalPads, as in the cohort reporting, will consider them as a dropout. So that's just a reminder. Make sure we have what we're in still in April. So you have still a whole lot of time to be able to prepare for this and be able to anticipate who are your potential fifth year seniors and who would be exited or completing high school by June, by the end of June. So you should be able to know by then who the students are, and then maybe you only have a few left for those students who are still completing high school up during the summer to complete those requirements. So by then you should be able to know who needs a future enrollment once you exit the students. Okay?
Kyron,
Yes, sir.
Rebecca wants you to emphasize would 12th graders use the E155 or E156?
Yes, that's what yeah, for 12 graders, who are expected to return in the next year. Was it?
Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, the
E156.
E156. Yeah, use E156. And then for E156, submit a new enrollment start date. For any fifth year senior, regardless of if they're sped or not, if they are returning for another 12 grade, use E156. Okay. So make sure that
Yeah,
that
Cal. I was gonna say CalPads will give you an error if you use E155.
yeah, yeah, you're right. Too many changes in CalPADS now. So yes, use E156 for returning students next year. However, make sure that you have their new enrollment record for the new year reported for them as well. So that way they will be classified as still enrolled rather than a dropout in the cohort reports. All right. So that's my part. And I guess
No, you're not done yet, buddy.
I'm not done yet. What else?
Can you revisit the cumulative enrollment extract?
Okay, let's go there.
You don't have to do as thoroughly as you did it, but this is the first time we've ever referred anybody to looking for LTEL information. So just point out the extract where you got it and what you're looking at again. That would be great.
All right, let's do another demo.
Eh,
Okay, so what I did was I went to the extracts page. I went to ODS extracts. I click on the cumulative enrollment ODS download, and it should bring this up. So you have here multiple, you know, tabs, but to simplify the demo, you choose the current academic year, and then you pick the schools, and then, if you just want the enrollments for this current year, check this box. If not, leave it as is. If you want CalPads to email you when the download is ready, check this box and then put your email here and then request file. Once you have that, you've done that, you should be able to download the file. And then, the file normally comes up as a text file, right? If your if your SIS is already configured to be able to pick it up and then present you that report in a legible manner internally in your SIS, then by all means just go and import that into your SIS. If not, we provided a template for that. You just go to help, go to batch file template download. It should bring you to this part here. So click on extract templates, click on this CNR extract template. The template, once you download the template, make sure that you allow CalPads to allow your system to accept that security. So when I use the template, I do have a security issue here like this one, right? So what you do is maybe request your IT person to just allow this to be accepted by the system. So you can right click on the file, go to properties, and then there is an unblock option here. If this is grayed out, then you may want to ask your IT person to unblock it to help you be able to download the file automatically. Or you can just copy the heading in that file, put it in a spreadsheet, and then convert the file, the extract that you had downloaded. But bottom line is, once you have an updated or allowed that file, just click on import it, pick the file, and then it would generate these columns. Now, these columns here, again, you have 5 different dates, right? So we go to this SSID just to show you why CALPADS determined this as a potential LTL. See, the student was EL since 2017. They never attained an RFEP status. So see how the student was there on 2017, and then they probably disappeared, moved out of state or country, and then came back in 2020. But during this time of enrollment at your district, the student was never reclassified, or if they tested, then they failed reclassification levels. And so the student was LTL. And so the definition for this LTL can also be determined in the user manual. If you go to resource glossary, there is an LTL definition here. So you have here your long-term English learner start date. So this is how it is defined or determined. There is a formula for that. So this is how it is determined. And so based on that, this file will then pick that LTEL start date and then use that as a potential LTEL student. So, yeah,
I was going to say the key thing is Kyron is saying potential, and I don't want you guys to overlook his use of that word.
yeah.
The CalPADS definition that's in the glossary is different than what is used for the dashboard and different from what is used for DataQuest
Mhm.
because we're trying not to miss anyone. And so we don't use either definition. We're trying to find anyone that is a potential LTL. So you still, once you identify these students, want to confirm do they meet a dashboard definition or the DataQuest definition. But we're trying to make sure that any potential LTL can be seen and you have, you know, visibility. Sorry, Kyron.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for making it for simplifying that statement with that statement. So yeah, so this is new. So this year it's all either an ODS. That information can be determined through ODS 515.2, which is the cohort extract, or the CNR extract. Next year, I believe requirements will be including that in the 1.21 report on all of the snapshot reports. So, watch out for that change next year. But for now, these are all just extracts. That way you can download that extract, look at your potential LTLs, and make sure that they are, RFEPs are accounted for those students who really reclassified as RFEP. That way it takes them out of that LTL status. If not, then I guess you guys have to make sure the students learn English better to be able to fulfill a reclassified status.
You have completed this module. Please continue to the next video. Thank you.